Yeah, they're not true hibernators. Now, for those of us that are a little bit older, has everyone seen the fur? For those of us that are a little bit older, in school, we probably learned that bears hibernate. That's what they taught us when we were kids. And maybe they taught us that because that was a simpler way to explain the concept, or maybe they just didn't know better at the time. But it turns out bears do not hibernate. They do something else. And the word for what they do is called estivation. Not hibernation, but estivation. Bears estivate. And the difference, if I can do it by analogy, is that when an animal hibernates, its heartbeat slows almost to a stop. And its breathing rate, its respiration rate, slows almost to a stop. And it's almost as if it was going into, say, an extended coma for the winter time. Just barely alive, body processes just barely functioning, just enough to keep it alive. And if you arouse an animal from hibernation, that can be fatal to it. Estivation, on the other hand, is just like a long, deep sleep, a state of dormancy. And one of the easiest ways to see the difference is that when an animal estivates, say a warm day comes along in January, just one of those fluke warm days, maybe the bear will get out and stretch and go for a little walk and see if it could find something to eat. An animal hibernating would, of course, not do that, right? So those are the main differences between estivation and hibernation. Bears don't hibernate. Now, we do have some animals in the park that actually do hibernate. Hibernation is a real thing, and there are animals that do it. Does anybody know what some of them might be? You give me one, and you give me one.
Ground squirrel?
Some of our squirrels hibernate. Good.
Deer?
Nah, deer don't
I
hibernate.
was going to say ground squirrel.
We're going to say ground squirrel? Okay, so you both get credit for the squirrel. That's okay. You're allowed to have more than one answer. It's okay. What else?
Marmot?
Marmots. Marmots, the yellow-bellied marmot. Who's seen a marmot so far?
What is that?
Okay. You guys want to describe what it looked like?
Kind of a fuzzy
Little fuzzy
ball.
Yeah. It's a fuzzy critter about this big, except in Mineral King they're about this big. But they're about this big, they're fuzzy, they're brown, and their bellies are yellow, so they're called yellow-bellied marmots. And they live up in the higher elevations, and they hibernate for 7 to 9 months, because winter is really long up there. Okay? And generally, well, you might see one at the higher elevations, and you might also find one under the hood of your car. Because we found recently that marmots love radiator hoses and electrical wires and things like that. And if you go down to Mineral King where the marmots are really severe, you see people out on the trails with chicken wire wrapped all the way around their car. Sometimes the marmots crawl into the engine, and we've had people fly marmots back to us from Southern California and Los Angeles because they rode home in the engine for hundreds of miles. I'm not kidding.
And didn't get killed?
No, they didn't get killed. They're smart. They know where the moving parts are. So, but unless you find one inside the hood of your car, you're most likely to find a marmot up at the higher elevations. Now we have one other animal besides the squirrels and the marmots that hibernates, and those are some of our chipmunks. So some of our chipmunks, some of our squirrels, and all of our marmots hibernate. Now when a bear does this thing for the winter, what's that word again? I'm glad I asked. We'll have a quiz at the end of the tour. Estivation, right? When a bear estivates, where does it go to spend the winter? Anyone know? Where does it go? Okay.
Or like it's not like a cave, like a hole in a tree that fell over.
Yeah, those are the two main things. Sometimes in a rocky cave, or sometimes in the hollowed out bottom of a tree. Like if you see some of our trees, live or dead, that are hollowed out at the bottom, a lot of times they'll go in there. And the male bear sometimes will den up for the winter, not even always. But the ones who will always den up for the winter are the pregnant female bears. Because while they're denned up, that's when they have the cubs. And the cubs are born at this latitude, usually in late January. If you were to go north, say to Yosemite, just a couple 100 miles away, they might be born in early February. The spring comes later there. So late January, and when they're born, they weigh about 10 ounces. Little tiny, they look like little pocket mice. They're really, really small. But by the time they emerge from the den in the spring, they're up to 10 or 15 pounds. Okay, so they get big fast. And that's just from mother's milk. And then when they emerge from the den, the cub, there's usually two, sometimes one, sometimes three, but usually two. The cubs travel with the mother all through that spring and summer and fall, and then they den up with her again the next winter. Into the next spring, and then late the spring of its second year, the cub and the mother go their separate ways. During that year, the mother has a whole bunch of things to teach the cub. And if you think about what we talked about at our last stop, she has to teach the cub how in the springtime to follow the warm weather up to higher and higher elevations and how to eat those grasses and roots. And then she has to teach him how to come back down here in the summer and find the berries and eat the berries. And then in the fall, how to migrate down to the foothills and find the acorns. And then how to come up back here in the winter and find a place to den. So there's all these lessons that have to be taught. She also has to teach the young cub how to climb trees, how to run away from danger, sometimes how to fish, how to tear logs apart for ants, how to reach into beehives and get all those yummy bees. So this takes a whole annual cycle through the year. So when you see a young bear, it doesn't look like an adult, and it doesn't look like a little tiny cub, but it's by itself. It's probably a yearling, one that's just within the last month or so parted ways with its mother. We'll talk. So if the cub stays with the mother all through that first year and into that second year, that implies that female bears really can't mate every year, right? Because they have to be with the cub that whole next year. It's true. So female bears only mate every other year because they need 16 months or so to be with the cub. So it's only every other year. And later, up on Bear Hill itself, we'll talk about how even that changed when we used to feed the bears. We'll talk about all the different ways that a bear's behavior changed by us feeding them. Okay, we just covered a whole lot of stuff. Any questions on any of that? Okay, good. So let's go up a little bit more to the top of the hill.
Actually, question.
Yes.
How is the regulation of the population? So there's nobody with no other animals with black bear, only the hunger.
Yeah, and there's nothing
Not allowed.
A grizzly bear can kill a black bear, but we don't have grizzlies here. So black bears are pretty much kind of at the top of the food chain. We have mountain lions, but mountain lions kill deer, not really bear. Maybe a cub, but not a adult bear. So pretty much nothing really preys on the bears. Well, photos of a ranger feeding a bear and of a bunch of bears being fed at once. So maybe I'll send one this way and one that way. Here's a picture. Have a look at it and then just pass it to the next person. Okay? So as I mentioned to some of you just when we were first starting the walk, this used to be the park's garbage dump. This is where the excess food from the lodges and from the dining areas was just brought and dumped. And the bears began to come here because they realized they could get a free meal. And then gradually the park officials said, hey, if we turn it into a visitor attraction, lots of people will get to see bears. And if they see the bears, that'll help get more support for the park. So they had a good motive. They wanted to gain public support.